Psychology students, we are starting week 28, which is our last section really of the course. It's on mental health. So we're going to work on mental health in week 28 and 29. We're going to look at all the different categories of diagnoses. And then in week 30 and in week 31, we're going to look at treating mental illness. So we are getting really close to the end of the course. I hope you continue to work daily on it, making sure you're going back through and reviewing. This week is slightly different than before because I'm going to post this video right with the week 28 Zoom meeting and video assignment. It's going to be all one because this is a little bit more, I'm going to treat this a little bit more like a concept map. So you're going to upload two things for this assignment. You're going to have a concept map for this content. I'll show you how the big questions we're answering. And then there's a little discussion this week, and you'll also have a College Board set of practice questions. It is entitled Positive Psychology Quiz. So at the end of this lesson, you'll just see, are you doing okay from what you did last week? But here is where we are. We're starting what's known more officially as abnormal psychology. That's why we kind of looked at stress and stressors and health psychology and positive psychology because, so much of the old research, on, like if we look at who Freud was talking to, or a lot of the original research on psychology was focused on studying people who were sick instead of people who are healthy. So, one of the hardest things that's going to be when you read through this, and this is a warning that every psychology student is given, is that you might wonder, like, do I have this? Do I have this? Because these things are on like a spectrum. It's not like, I'm depressed and then I'm not depressed. Like it's just one or the other. There's a whole spectrum of depression, of anxiety, and we're going to find that, we fit on that spectrum someplace. And the question we're going to kind of look at today, these are the questions we want to look at, is how do we define it as a disorder? Like how does a set of behaviors, how does it switch between something that's maybe one of my weaknesses or something I need to work on versus something that makes me quote unquote sick or ill or has a disorder, right? How should we understand disorders? How do underlying biological factors contribute? How do troubling environments influence our well-being? And how do these effects of nature and nurture interact? How should we classify psychological disorders? And can we do so in a way to help people without stigmatizing or labeling them? Are people with psychological disorders at risk of harming themselves or other? And what do we know about the rates of psychological disorders? So kind of think this is what you're going to kind of put together, in your own way from the lesson today. And also, so I have a lecture I'm going to do, and then I also want to show you on this assignment, I also put some extra videos. So there's the overview from Crash Course on Psychological Disorders. There's another Mr. Sin's discussion of Introduction to Psychological Disorders. There's something more, what the DSM-5 means for classifying. This is something that's more, what might I see on the news? And then very little down here, which is super interesting, the new asylums. This was a documentary done because, since basically the 1970s through till now, there's been a complete closure of most places that were meant to house or help people with mental disorders. And when those were closed, you're going to find that the prison system pretty much became a place for people with mental disorder. And I think we hear a lot about that on the news, of whether or not people who need help are being treated or not. So you can, maybe you just take notes as I speak, and then at the end you kind of organize that into a concept map so that you can have it as a resource to study from. All right, so what I want you to do, the first thing you can just kind of take notes on this. I'm not going to have this be a discussion for those of you not in class. In class, this is a discussion. But what I'd like you to do is there's going to be some cases here, and write down for me whether or not you think each of these people has a mental disorder or not. It's kind of just a yes or no. So you can write on your paper, Gustav, mental disorder or not mental disorder, and then a kind of why. All right, so Gustav has led a turbulent life. As a young child, he often skipped school when he did not attend. He disrupted class, often got into fights with other boys. He was finally expelled from school altogether after beating up another student in a high school class. Since then, Gustav has not held a job for any length of time. He began making money by breaking into homes and stealing whatever he could get his hands on. He feels no guilt about his behavior. He has never been married, but does have a few children. Despite all of this, Gustav is a popular person and has a certain charm. He reports that he is quite happy with his life. So what do you think? Mental disorder or no mental disorder? And then a little bit of why. All right, then we have Katrina. Katrina had, I think that's miswritten, had an overall happy childhood with many friends at school. She made good grades and decided to go to law school after graduating from college. After her first year of law school, she began noticing periods of feeling low. At first, she didn't think much about it, but after a year or so, these episodes began to get worse. In addition to feeling depressed during this time, she was also overly sensitive to criticism. She sometimes found it difficult to concentrate on her studies during this time and often lacked the energy to do much of anything except play video games. So, mental disorder, no. And why do you think that is? All right, we got Ida here. Ida is the only child of physicians. She did well in high school and had many close friends. However, when she got to college, her grades dropped and she spent one semester on probation. She married soon after graduation and had 2 children. Ida would stay home with her kids because her husband's job paid well. Recently, after her husband revealed that he had an affair, the couple decided to divorce, and although Ida had custody of the children, she had to move into a small apartment and look for work. She eventually took a job that she disliked. She has been sad for the last few months and cries a lot and has difficulty sleeping. Mental disorder or not, and why do you think so? And then we have Ian. Ian was born in rural Nebraska. He grew up on a farm and he knew he wanted to be a farmer himself. After graduation, he bought the land, planted corn. He was happy with his lifestyle and made enough money to support himself. One day he was seriously injured in an accident involving machinery. Although the injuries were life-threatening, he lived and his legs were amputated. It has been over a year since the accident. Ian still takes to control his pain. His thinking remains quite rational. However, he misses farming. Recently, wonders if his new life is worth living, and told the doctors he would like to end it all. So, mental disorder or not, and why do you think so? All right. So, and now so you've got your guesses on these, right? What do you think and why? And then I'm going to read a definition of mental disorder to you, kind of the official one. And then you can kind of go back and see, do I want to change any of those things? Or, my rationale of why. So a mental illness is defined as a clinically significant behavior or psychological syndrome or pattern that occurs in an individual that is associated with present distress, painful symptoms, or disability, impairment in one or more significant areas of functioning, or with a significantly increased risk of suffering, death, pain, disability, or an important loss of freedom. All right, and we can kind of add to that a collection of symptoms marked by a disruption to people's thoughts, emotions, or behavior that causes distress or suffering. Such thoughts, emotions, or behaviors are dysfunctional or maladaptive. They interfere with normal day-to-day life. All right, and we're going to, I think maybe simply, is this 4 Ds in abnormal psychology. Dysfunction, right? I cannot function in my life. Deviance from what is considered normal. Distress and danger, right? And these things, they need to be going on a lot of times in the DSM, which we didn't talk about that, but this manual, this DSM-5 is the official diagnostic, if you wanted the long diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. This is what you need to know very well if your job is to make diagnoses. In the United States, this is incredibly important because of health insurance, and that if you don't have a diagnosis, your health insurance may not cover it. Some health insurance still don't cover even when it does have a diagnosis. But a lot of this, this distress or dysfunction, a lot of times it's going on for maybe half a year without it improving. And that's there to help us, understand the difference between maybe grieving a loss of someone that causes sadness and it, not relieving itself with some help. All right, so you can kind of go back through those cases and see, do I want to change anything? And I'll read your work when you turn it in. The discussion here is, I just gave you a little bit. There's a discussion on the course page that I would like for you to have this week with each other. Again, I'm not going to, oops, I went too far. I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to read, and I like watching what you guys think about this, but you can see, when is a behavior considered abnormal? And the questions there are, how are these mental disorders classified? What causes a mental illness, right? When should we look at the culture or environment as causing the abnormal behaviors? And when should we think of the behavior as occurring within the person? And what I'd like you to do is your initial, what do you know? Don't look anything up. From what I've just talked about to what you know, from what you've seen in your life, make an initial posting. And then when you're done with this lesson and using the other resources that I've provided, and you've kind of finished your concept map for this week or this lesson, you can go back and make comments on 2 of your classmates' postings. And we'll see if this helps us learn a little bit more. And I'm going to help you too. All right, that's what we're going to next. So in this DSM, it's important to understand that there's 5 kind of ways in which I would make an axis. So the first axis, called axis 1, we're going to study all of these clinical syndromes, right? So this one, maybe it's depression. We're going to look at the different kinds of mood disorders. Actually, I can bring them here, right? You're going to look at mood disorders. You're going to look at anxiety disorders, somatoform disorders, dissociative disorders. Childhood disorders are things like autism and ADHD, and you're going to look at schizophrenia. These ones are all axis 1 diagnoses. Axis 2 can be either a personality disorder, which once you've learned about these things, you're going to come back up here, and Gustav may very well have a personality disorder. You can have 2 things, right? I can be depressed with a personality disorder. I can be anxious. I can have a generalized anxiety disorder and have a personality disorder, but we need to keep the 2 distinct, and you're going to learn about that in this unit. We also need to have an understanding here on axis 2, whether we call it mental retardation or cognitively disabled. We need to understand if a person is operating with limited cognitive abilities, right? And so this would be what we also, and this is usually ruled out first, if there's a general medical condition. So let's say, for example, I'm a clinician and I'm worried that somebody might be depressed. I'm going to find out if their thyroid function is normal first, because if they have a biological reason for their clinical presentation, then I want to work with a medical doctor to deal with that as well. Axis 4, I'm going to notice the psychosocial or environmental problems, right? We can go back up here. That's why I had these cases. We can come back up here and look at what's going on with Ida, right? There's a whole lot of psychosocial environmental issues going on with her that maybe helping those issues means we're going to be able to deal with whether or not we have diagnosed her with depression or anxiety, right? We're going to know how to deal with it. And then this global assessment, we want to do their total, like it's a scale of their functioning. You can kind of think of this as if I was a clinician and somebody first came in my office, I would give them a score based on my kind of analysis or diagnosis with them, and then a way to see, am I seeing improvement at all? And we're going to see in each of the lessons I have the DSM, I have these criteria for exactly what you need. So you don't need to find this book. As we go through mood disorders, I'm going to have all the criteria there for you to see with those. All right. The next thing we want to think about when we're talking about disorders is we want to understand that kind of our psychological perspective. This is really good review from way back to the beginning of the year. The perspective in which often, like if you go to graduate school and you get a master's or a PhD in psychology, especially clinical psychology, that university is going to kind of focus in one of these domains. And it's not saying that we don't do something more eclectic, but often people are trained in one of these areas more so than others. So pause the video. This is really good review. So these are different explanations over here, and these are the psychological perspectives here. See if you can match them up. So pause the video and, write down, can you match them, and then come back to it. All right, so I'm assuming you've written down your answers, so let's go through. I always pick with the easiest, right? Biological would be genetic or physiological predispositions. Maladaptive learned associations, I hope that you have learning associated with behaviorism, right? This would be through anxiety, through, classical conditioning, or so forth. All right, psychodynamic, that's not the one I wanted to grab, that's childhood. Social cultural contexts, that's sociocultural. Maladaptive forms of behavior that enabled human survival. Evolutionary, lack of social support and inability to fill one's potential. I hope you're thinking, Maslow's hierarchy, and maladaptive beliefs, attitudes, or emotions would go to cognitive, right? So in terms of thinking about why does somebody have the illness, these perspectives often help us, or we can understand, why one might have that. And obviously, I hope you can see that some disorders lead themselves to some of these perspectives more than others. And you're going to kind of look at that through the unit as you look at each disorder, you're going to think of the causes for it. Obviously, though, most of the time, people use this biopsychosocial model. All right, so the disorder comes when we have biological influences, we have psychological influences, and we have social cultural influences, right? That all of these things come together usually to have something be considered a disorder. We also consider this a medical model. Oftentimes, it's not that it doesn't always work really well with, like, we want to say, like, I have a broken leg, right? I have an etiology of it. I fell down. The leg is broken. The diagnosis, you took an x-ray, you see a broken leg. Okay, I'm gonna, treat the leg, and prognosis is how fast it's gonna take for me to get better. Sometimes this works, but even if we go to etiology and we come back and we look at these things, it is so much more complex than most medical problems. But we do definitely want to see, is there a physical cause for an illness, right? And if there is a physical cause, we try to treat that physical cause. Whether it's, let's say, schizophrenia, you're going to learn that is often an excessive amount of dopamine in the brain, so that lends itself to a medical treatment. One thing to really keep in mind on prognosis is most of the time this would be more like treating diabetes, where it's something you're going to do for the rest of your life. It's going to have its ups and downs, where sometimes it's worse or better than others. Most of the time our prognosis is not a cure, like I would say for a broken leg. Rates of illness, I think it's important to understand that it's very high and it's been going higher. All right, and we'll talk about that, maybe why, but we can see these are Americans reporting in the past year. So phobia, 9% of Americans, major depressive disorder, 7.8%, social anxiety, 7.1%, ADHD, 4.4%, post-traumatic stress disorder, 3.6%, bipolar, 2.8%, general anxiety, 2.7%, obsessive compulsive disorder, 1.2%, schizophrenia, less than a half, right? So, and we should understand that it's a big problem. Each year, about 160,000 Americans are among drug, alcohol, or suicide deaths of despair. That's a huge number. We can see years that we have, this is on self-harm, so this is you're hurting yourself but not dying. We can see that this for women has gone really high. There's a lot of self-injury. Males, it also continues to go up. So, this one will it says someone will likely die by suicide in a 40 odd seconds it takes you to read this paragraph, right? So it's a very big problem. And it's why I have here, what can I do, right? What can I do to help if someone is speaking of harming themselves? These might be statements right here, or write things online. If a classmate, friend, or family member talks about suicide, what can you do? Listen, emphasize, offer hope. I have been with a couple people multiple times when they're in this way. It was a very scary situation. I was with a woman on the 22nd floor of a high-rise building in China, and she showed me where she wanted to jump from. And I listened to her, right? And then step 3, I protected her. I went to the director of the school, and we got locks on all of her windows, so that was just not an option. And she started, I'm not a doctor, so she didn't see me, but I connected her with people that were going to help her. She now has a child. She's doing very well, so it is possible to do these things. So I want to listen, offer hope. I want to try to connect them with somebody who can help them. And I want to try to make sure, right, whether it's a parent, a teacher, a school nurse, a counselor, somebody to make sure that they're safe, right? Those are the things that you can do. All right, I know a heavy topic, so we talked about a lot. So you can take what I've given you and then use these resources that are here for you under this assignment. There's more resources here, right, to kind of put together an understanding of, how are we classifying mental illness? How are we diagnosing it? How serious of a problem is it? And I'll see what you have up there, and I'll look at your discussions. And then just as on the College Board, just to practice what was from last week, you'll see this positive psychology quiz. Just run through and do the questions, make sure you got last. And finally, if you have any questions, make sure you send them to me. All right, thank you for your attention in this lesson. Have a great week.